Teaching each other is something that humans have always done. Since before recorded history, humans have been handing down our growing store of knowledge from one generation to the next. So I think that instructional design must be one of the most important things we can learn to do. Taking this class on developing instructional materials has really taught me just how complex a job that can be. But there was one area in particular that I was surprised to realize just how big of an impact it had. That area is knowing your audience. Today I've chosen 3 aspects of instructional design to talk about that I felt this had a major effect on: depth, modality, and accessibility. First, the one that was most obvious to me, the depth of your instructions. How complex or specific your instructions need to be. Designing instructions from beginner to expert levels can make a huge difference, so you really need to know your audience's skill level. Is your audience already going to be familiar with your subject? Is there a specific area of your instructions you need to focus on? If you're designing for an expert, you can skim over a lot of little steps and use some more advanced and specific terminology that you can be comfortable that your audience will be aware of. But if you're designing your instructions for beginners, there may be many things that someone who is familiar with the subject wouldn't even think to include in their instructions. For example, when designing my recipe instructions, I did not even think about talking about food safety with raw chicken, which is extremely important if you are a beginner cook, until one of my testers mentioned it. The second thing was the modality of your instructions. The subject you're giving instructions on probably has a bigger effect than your audience on this, of course, but choosing to have your instructions printed or digital, just text or including illustrations, video, or even interactive can all be affected by your audience. The technical skill level of your audience, for instance, can make the difference in whether you could more effectively use interactive online instructions or maybe just something that can be printed out and studied at the user's own pace. Age can be a factor in this as well. Your instructions are definitely going to be designed very differently if your audience is a group of elementary age children or retired senior citizens. The children are likely to need a more fun, colorful, and maybe interactive type design, where the senior citizens don't necessarily need all the fun and flair, but might be more comfortable and therefore more likely to succeed with some well-planned illustrated examples and more specific text descriptions. And that's before you even take into consideration accessibility issues. And speaking of accessibility, the final aspect I wanted to discuss today was the accessibility of your instructions. More and more every day, there is less and less of an excuse to skip accessibility steps on instructional materials. The National Center for Learning Disabilities reported in 2017 that approximately 1 in 5 children in the United States have a learning disability or attention issues, but in addition, that millions of children go undiagnosed. Assuming that statistic holds accurate for adults as well, if your instructions are going to be used by an audience of at least 5 people, you can be fairly sure that at least one of them could benefit from something as simple as adding subtitles to your video tutorials or presentations, which we all learned this semester can be done automatically by several kinds of software. If your instructions are going to be a digital document, you can properly format headings so that they can be read by devices used by the blind. If your instructions will be printed out into a physical copy, there are specific fonts that are easier for those with dyslexia to read. For instance, the font Arial is one of those, and it's included by default on many, if not most, devices, so you don't even need to download or install anything for that. That works for digital documents as well. Ultimately, as we finish out this semester, I think that the most important thing I learned in this class is that there are not one, but 2 main points of focus you should start with when you design instructional materials. The thing you're giving instructions about, of course, but equally important are the people who will be using the instructions. Thank you.